Modern life, people, two people seeking attention, and they're both getting it, and so I'm sure both guys are really happy. You know what would help if all of you just stopped covering both of them? Is that possible? You could probably stop covering LaVar. I don't think you can stop covering the president. I don't think that'll work.
He might be happy.
It would be nice for all of us if both of them would just be quiet. Wouldn't that be great?
Sorry, Coach. The president has the sports world in his crosshairs yet again. We have to cover it, Robin. Donald Trump and LaVar Ball. It seems like something that should be settled at WrestleMania.
Yeah, what might be Steve Kerr's nightmare would probably be Vince McMahon's dream. Both have been there before. I could see it on the marquee. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I could see it.
You know, we keep asking if Conor McGregor is going to at some point flip over to WWE. Why aren't we asking it of President Trump and even LaVar Ball? Meanwhile, the last time the president took on the sports world, specifically the NFL, it created absolute chaos. This time, Trump taking on LaVar Ball, both men known to exaggerate. Can we just say it? Outright lie
We've
about
never
things.
seen him play Michael Jordan one-on-one.
Yeah. All right, I'll stick with exaggerate. But, Robin, do you think Trump's comments will have the same impact as when he had a huge impact of calling NFL players SOBs?
No, I don't think so, because we've seen this before. Now, when it was on the same topic matter, including Marshawn Lynch this morning, it didn't resonate because I think people have been like, all right, been there, done that. And then there are plenty of the detractors, for the president who are going to say, hey, look, he's doing this for reasons to take away from some of the more important stuff that's going on. The reason I think this resonates is because LaVar Ball is a character himself, so people want to see how he responds. In other cases, they haven't been waiting on the response as much as the instigation.
Yeah, our own Jonathan Jones, right, tweeting that his thoughts on LaVar is really going to hinge on how he responds now to President Trump.
And there's a little bit of a difference here, too, where one guy is promoting his kids and his sneaker brand, and the other guy's the president.
You hit on it right there. That's why this is so different, and we have to make sure to keep things in mind here. This is not apples to apples. LaVar Ball is a helicopter dad who is trying to sell basketball shoes. The other is the leader of the free world. We cannot treat these like they are the exact same thing, or like LaVar and Trump are somehow equal in the platform they have and in the words that they say. There are true consequences for things that the president says and does. There are really no consequences except for maybe a few more ESPN First Take appearances for LaVar Ball, maybe a couple more shoes sold or not sold. But I think what Steve Kerr was saying is right. We have to make sure, and he said stop covering both, but one really is the leader of the free world. We have to cover that. LaVar Ball, we just can't act like they're the same.
Yeah, what goes on with LaVar Ball is truly trivial, and the danger in comparing the two apples to apples is trivializing something that is far more significant and has far bigger ramifications.
The other thing about Marshawn Lynch and the president tweeting about how it's disrespectful to kneel, I mean, that's playing right into his base. If you feel like it's disrespectful to kneel during the anthem, you will always think it's disrespectful, and so what Trump says will just reinforce your own ideals. Flip side, if you think this is kneeling is in a way bringing attention to social justice issues, you're only going to be reinforced in your thinking that way. So with that in mind, I don't think it's going to move the needle at all.
No, definitely not.
Hey guys. Tiki Barber, the Pro Bowl running back, co-host of Tiki and Tierney Show on CBS Sports Radio, is here as he joins us every single Monday. Let's start off with the Eagles. Tiki, this is going to pain you as a former Giant. They are soaring. Carson Wentz, he's our adrenaline performer, is presented by Toyota. Let's go places. Wentz shook off a lackluster first half to lead Philly to 3 straight touchdown drives. After halftime, he now leads the NFL in touchdown passes with 25. The Eagles have hung at least 30 points in 5 of their last 6 games. It's easy to see the brilliance of Wentz, aided by the running game, a ferocious defensive front. But Tiki, Sunday's game was a tale of 2 halves. Did you see anything in the first half that has you concerned for the Eagles?
You know what? When you've won as much as the Eagles have won, sometimes you're afforded a bad half. But the beauty of having an offensive coordinator who's a former quarterback in Frank Reich and a head coach who's a former quarterback, and Doug Peterson, you know that you can make an adjustment. You can listen to your very smart and young quarterback in Carson Wentz, who will tell you exactly what he's seeing. This is what they're trying to do to us. This is the coverages that we're getting. This is how they're ganging up to stop our run. 35 rushing yards in the first half was unacceptable for a team that prides itself on its offensive line. So you know they got a browbeating, but then they got a game plan that came out and obviously made a huge difference from a 75-yard drive. Then they force a punt defensively. Then you get a 90-yard drive. They force another punt defensively. Then they get an 85-yard drive. And then they get a strip sack fumble for a touchdown. You could see that this was all about leadership, not just from the coaching staff, but internally. It was the Lane Johnsons of the world, those guys who got angry and got mad that they were underperforming, and it made a huge difference in the second half.
So the Eagles look really good in the second half. Therefore, the Cowboys look really bad in the second half.
Oh, yeah.
And they have for a couple of weeks now. Of course, Zeke Elliott has been out. Jerry Jones has been in a public feud with the league. He said afterwards he doesn't think his actions have any effect on the team's play. What is the Cowboys' biggest problem right now, and can it be rectified?
Well, not until Ezekiel Elliott comes back, and not until Tyron Smith comes back. Look, it's easy. It was easy last year for Dak Prescott because he turned around and handed the ball off for 1,700 yards to Ezekiel Elliott, and then when he did throw the ball, he was standing in clean pockets the entire time. That's just not happening right now. When he's forced to pass, he's always under pressure. So that comfort that we saw last year, both from having the run game as a crutch, but also from not having pressure around him, is not the case right now. He's got to learn, right, that there's a clock that I normally have when Tyron Smith is in there. There's a different clock when he's not. And so he has to step forward. He has to get rid of the ball quicker. He has to make decisions much quicker than he's used to doing. And it's a learning process. Let's not forget, it's only his second year. He hasn't seen all of these things because it was, I'll say it again, easy for him in year one. Now he's learning on the job, and it's showing up on how they're playing.
Okay, but quick turnaround here. They'll play on Thanksgiving. Can he learn enough to get right by Thursday?
Well, I think this will be on Jason Garrett and the coaching staff to figure out ways to get the ball out of his hand more quickly. Look, they tried to be balanced, right? They ran the ball and passed the ball roughly about the same, 26 or so each. But it was more about efficiency. So they were efficient running the ball, but they were grossly inefficient throwing the ball. And so to make yourself more efficient when you're passing the rock, you just have to get it out of your hands quicker. It's easy to say that. You have to take your shots, obviously, so that the second and third levels of a defense respect you. But a lot of this can be rectified by play calling.
Yeah, maybe he's watching a little Tom Brady tape, too.
Yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
no one gets it out of his hands faster. It took overtime, but the Saints notched a comeback win over Washington. They've won 8 straight. Now they're 8-2. This is going to sound crazy, but can they just run the table the rest of the way?
No, they're not going to run the table. They have 4 division games left, and then the Chargers, they got to go play out in California. No, I think maybe it's actually the Rams out in California. Yeah. I can't remember who it is. But they have 4 division games left, and at some point, the division, who knows them well, if the Falcons will see them twice in 3 weeks, someone will figure them out. However, I don't think it's going to stop the momentum that we're seeing. This team has learned how to win in all 3 facets of their game. Playing great defense, which we've seen in the previous 7 weeks. They didn't show it so much yesterday. But running the ball with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. And then we saw with Drew Brees. Look, they are smart, right? One of the great things about Sean Payton, and I know this and I'm biased because he was my offensive coordinator, he is a great manipulator of what he knows is coming. And so we saw on the second touchdown drive that tied it up ultimately with a Kamara dump off that he bobbled for a little bit and then got the 2-point conversion. There was a play where they hit a wide receiver across the middle in the zone, right? It was wide open. We all saw it, right? The next play, Sean Payton knew that there was a blitz going to be dialed up. He didn't know probably it was a zone dog, but he got a zone dog, right? And with a zone dog, a defensive end drops off into coverage on the backside of the blitz. And the defensive end is now covering Coby Fleener. Drew Brees definitely moves out of the way of the zone dog, buys himself some time, hits Coby Fleener, you get a 24-yard play down the sideline. He just can't, Ryan Kerrigan can't keep up with that, right? And so they put themselves in positions to succeed and come back and win because they have a very intelligent and seasoned quarterback and a coordinator in Sean Payton who recognizes what's going to happen to him before it happens. And that's why they've been so good for so long.
I have to say, that's the most thorough explanation of a zone dog that I've ever heard before in my life.
That's what we call Robin, actually. It's his nickname, the Zone Dog.
Now, remember that whole decision to bench Tyrod Taylor for Nathan Peterman?
Fun.
Didn't turn out so good. Peterman threw 5 picks. He was like Oprah in one of those giveaway shows, and you get a pick, and you get a pick. And that is 3 more than, a couple more than Tyrod Taylor had thrown all season thus far this year. Head coach Sean McDermott said he didn't regret the decision, but did regret the result.
Yeah, you did regret the decision.
What is the fallout from that kind of move?
Look, this is hard. The fallout is he can't go back, right? And maybe he can, but he'll look weak, right? It'll look like his decision was just flippant, that I didn't really know. Sean McDermott was a very good defensive coordinator when he was in Carolina. We all knew it, right? We saw it. They still have a great defense down there, and a lot of it are the remnants of what he installed. But even when he was in Carolina, and their quarterback was really good. Hell, he won an MVP. It wasn't, I'm dropping back and throwing the ball and, going through my reads. It was, Cam Newton, I'm going to, run the ball for 15 touchdowns a year. I'm going to complete 50-something% of my passes and just be an energetic force. It wasn't what he has in Buffalo. And so to make this decision to take Tyrod Taylor out and put in Nate Peterman, who is a 5th-round draft pick. Let's not forget, there's not many of them that in the middle of a season.
1 round for each pick.
Yeah, well, there's not one in the middle of the season who comes in as a rookie and just gives you that spark. I mean, maybe Tom Brady, but we all remember Tom Brady when he did it was by necessity, and he wasn't actually that great. Right? They just had a really good defense, and fortunately a couple big plays in the championship game and in the Super Bowl. But it doesn't work out when you switch quarterbacks to a guy who has 0 experience, and we saw the repercussions of that. I can't help but think this has a lot to do with the cap number that's tied to Tyrod Taylor next year. If they cut him, it's only $3 million against the cap. If he's there middle of March, it's $18 million against the cap. I know it's probably not an economic decision, but to me it feels like an economic decision.
Okay, even if it is an economic decision, and even if it is a sound economic decision, considering how many draft picks the Bills have in the next year and could trade up and get one of the good quarterbacks coming out of college. Even with that, Tiki, why this game?
I don't know.
Because you have the Colts sitting on your schedule coming up in just a few weeks at home. If you really need a sacrifice game, why not that one?
Look, I don't know if I've ever seen a team try to rebuild and see what we have while they're in the middle of a playoff race.
In the playoff race.
Well, they were. Now they're not.
Now they're not.
But they were in the playoffs. It's not like Tyrod Taylor is so bad that he wasn't Trevor Siemian out there over the last 6 weeks throwing 6 interceptions, and so you had to make a change. He was ineffective, but it was not really him that was ineffective against the Saints in the week before against the Jets. It was their defense. They've given up 500 yards rushing in the last 2 weeks. You add on this week, it's almost 700 yards rushing they've given up.
Okay, I'm sorry for everyone in the control room, but this is selfish because I have another question that I have to ask Tiki about this. I feel like on the outside, we talk a lot about the locker room and how things impact it. And sometimes former players like yourself will say, this is overblown.
No, this is not overblown.
Okay, because you have a rookie head coach.
Yes.
And you have a lot of cuts that have been made, trades that have been made.
Yeah, Marcel Darius being one.
And I think they cut a little too close to the bone personally with that cut. Too much fat got cut off of the roster. But now this.
Yeah.
How do you save the season?
It's hard because it's hard to save the season unless you go back to Tyrod Taylor, who actually looked okay. He had a turnover right away, but he looked okay in relief. It was a no-win situation.
They were down by almost 40.
But here's the problem, right? It's a menial thing, and for guys who make a lot of money, you want to get to the playoffs because you want the playoff check, right? And you want the acclaim that comes from being there, right? You just more notoriety from playing on that stage, and the Bills were there, right? Yeah, they had to clean up some things. Yeah, they had to figure out how to, with maybe schemes and defenses and blitz and things of that nature, to stop the sieve that is their defensive front against the run. But they were there, right? And given the weakness in the AFC, we talked about this last week, the weakness in the AFC, it was theirs for the taking, right? Who's coming out of the West? Nobody's coming out of the West. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to come out of the West, and they lost to the Giants this past weekend, right? I mean, maybe the Baltimore Ravens are making a run now, but other than the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's scaring you in this division that is for the last playoff spot? Now, the Buffalo Bills are out of it, and they have to fight their way back in. And if they have to stick with Nate Peterman, which I think Sean McDermott has to save face at this point, how the heck do they get to the postseason?
Well, it's a great question, and Kansas City is going to be absolutely licking their chops because they will play Buffalo next week. They're coming off of a loss, and normally after a bye week. Andy Reid is automatic heading into the game against the Giants, 16-2 off of a bye. They lose this crazy game, the swirling winds at Giants Stadium, which you know very well. But they're 6-4. You're right. They're leading a bad division. But what is wrong with the Chiefs?
I think there's a couple of things. Matt Nagy has an interesting relationship with Andy Reid, who was the head coach. He was a coaching intern, then he was a quality control, and then he was a quarterback coach, all with Andy Reid. He's never been with anybody other than Andy Reid. And now he is the offensive coordinator, I think in title only. But what we're seeing with the Kansas City Chiefs is that they're trying the same tricks over and over again. Right? You've seen it, and you hate it, right? The stupid shovel pass to Travis Kelce as he's coming across the defense. Defenses have seen this 15, 16 times already in 10 weeks in the NFL season, and so they're prepared for it. What happens? It gets blown up, and Snacks Harrison gets an interception off of this, right? And so the big plays, like these big gimmicks that we saw in the beginning of the season with Kareem Hunt and Travis Kelce, it was just big play after big play after big play, 60-yarder, 55-yarder, 76-yarder. Things of that nature have dried up because you've exhausted it. And so their playbook is too thin. I mean, it may be huge, and they just may not be getting to it, but they need to vary what they're presenting or what they're putting back out there because it's all shown up on tape. I mean, I don't watch the Kansas City Chiefs like I watch the New York Giants. So I know that. I know what that play is. I know this situation is coming. But I feel like I know that play is coming. I know that when this situation, they're going to run that play. And if I'm seeing this as a casual observer as a former player, imagine what a defensive coordinator or some wily vets like the Giants do have on defense are after seeing that over and over and over again. They need to change their MO because it's gotten a little bit stale.
We haven't asked if Alex Smith is the MVP recently.
We have to pump the brakes on that conversation.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the NFC, the Vikings beat the Rams 24-7. Case Keenum played another sound game. Is he their quarterback going forward?
We need to stop the snark that comes with Case Keenum.
It's something about his name, I think, is what it does.
You know what I mean? We're like, oh, Case Keenum. But they have Case Keenum.
No, we made fun of him in college because he was there for like 7 years,
yes,
and usually those people are called doctors.
Well, that's why he has 19,000 yards, which is a record by almost 2,000 in NCAA college football. But he is a really good quarterback. We're seeing it, especially as he has some confidence building talent around him. Right? They lost Dalvin Cook early on in the season. We're like, oh, well, there goes that run game. Well, Jerick McKinnon's okay. And what we found out is Latavius Murray still has some gas left in the tank with 95 yards and 2 touchdowns that he had. And when you have that kind of talent in your run game and you're not forced to have to drop back 30 or 40 times in a game, or you can just dink and dunk and throw a hook to Adam Thielen, who's maybe the most underrated superstar we've seen in the last couple of years, and go 65 yards for a touchdown, it makes your job easy as a quarterback. And not to say that his job is easy, but he's doing all the right things, right? He makes the deep throws when he needs to, but more importantly, he's smart, notwithstanding the 2 stupid picks he threw last week. He's been smart as a quarterback, and I think that's what this team needs in Minnesota, because their defense is world-beating, as we saw against the #1 scoring offense against the Rams this past weekend.
Okay, some breaking news from this morning. The Broncos, who are losers of 6 straight games, have fired their offensive coordinator, Mike McCoy. Tiki, is that going to make a difference?
Yeah, well, you know, it's the Hawthorne effect. We know this, right? The lighting plant. You turn the lights down, productivity goes up. Turn the lights up, productivity goes up. They had to do something, right? And they're turning the lights down or up, or whatever one you want to go. It's firing their offensive coordinator. And look, maybe there is some blame to go towards Mike McCoy, because when Trevor Siemian was the quarterback there a couple weeks ago, he was trying to do things that he just can't do, right? His skill set is not there, but those plays kept being called, and he kept making those mistakes, as we alluded to a little bit earlier, 6 turnovers in 3 weeks. And so they had to go back to Brock Osweiler. Now, Brock Osweiler is interesting because he's a pretty good quarterback, right? He leads them on drives. It's just when they get into the red zone, they short circuit. Or he throws an interception, it goes 87 yards or 90, 100 yards for a touchdown, but obviously came back and set up the first score for the Cincinnati Bengals. And so it's those red zone moments that you always turn to coaching, right? The field shrinks a little bit. You have to be more precise. Every player has to be acutely aware of every little thing that they're doing. And when those mistakes happen, like we saw with the Denver Broncos this past weekend against the Bengals, turnovers occur, or you get stuck kicking field goals and you can't win games that way. Unfortunately, that's on coaching. And so John Elway and the staff at Denver decided to make a change because they had to make a change.
How much, though, is on John Elway himself? He's going through coaches pretty fast.
A lot of it.
The reason why they have Brock Osweiler is because Paxton Lynch is clearly not ready to play.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of it on John Elway. You take risk, right? He's not. I mean, he's a great quarterback. We know it from his years under center and the Super Bowls and everything that he did. And evaluating talent is a completely different skill set, right? I always say, especially with quarterback, if you look at a guy or you have a conversation with a guy and he's not naturally curious, I mean, like he has to know, right? Why am I doing this? You know, why did you tell me to do that? Or why is this defensive back doing this? Or whatever that may be. If you're not picking that guy, then you're picking a failure, right? And I think just in hearing from what's going on in Denver, Paxton Lynch, to your point, is not that guy, right? Brock Osweiler, it wasn't a loyal guy. And so there just isn't his guy there. And it's just a miss on his part. Can they rectify? Can it resolve itself for the next couple of years? Maybe. But they're probably going to be looking for a quarterback.
It probably doesn't help either when the GM calls your team soft before the game and then they go out and lose.
Yeah, and they go out and lose.
I always feel like that's the answer when there is no answer, and they're just trying to like sort of throw chum into the water. And say, the players are soft. That's right, they've been soft.
Yeah.
You know, when there's actually, you know, you don't want the finger pointed at you.
Yeah, let's test their manhood.
Yeah,
let's put it to them.
It doesn't work because, I mean, guys aren't going to say, yeah, coach, you're right, we're soft. Yeah, no, they're saying, look, we play hard, especially defensively. They've been good, except for the last couple of weeks, and they feel defeated now because they don't make plays like they used to. That no-fly zone, that secondary used to be shut down. It's not that way anymore. It doesn't help when you get rid of T.J. Ward, when things kind of move around, you change the personality, you change the leadership, you change the chemistry of that unit for economic purposes, but you change the chemistry, it changes the team.
That defense has given up 112 points in 3 games.
It's amazing.
That is terrible.
You're
Tiki
right.
Barber, you're not terrible. You're the best. Thank you so much for being here. Always appreciate it.
As always, lots to get to in college football. There was Baker Mayfield. There's coaching vacancies. To get to it all, we welcome in our college football analyst, Pete Mundo. And we'll start with one of those vacancies, Pete. Jim Mora got fired by UCLA in the midst of his 6th season on his birthday. Are you surprised at all by the timing?
I feel bad that it was on his birthday, Robin, but I can't say I'm shocked because UCLA is saying to themselves, if we're going to move on from Jim Mora after the season, just do it now. The reports were that Chip Kelly and Florida were getting closer to a potential deal over the weekend, and if UCLA thinks they have a real shot at him, which they should, then they got to say, let's just move on. Pay the buyout, get to the next step, see if we can lure Chip Kelly, he's got the West Coast ties, and see if there's a fit there. And if it's not a fit, then you're in the same place you would have been after the season anyway had Chip Kelly gone to Florida. So you lose the big rivalry game, cover the spread, but still, it's a situation where it was time to move on, 6 seasons in, and see who's next.
Happy 56th birthday. Here's a pink slip for you. That's just cold. You mentioned Chip Kelly. Looks like he may have his pick, I guess, if he wants, between Florida, UCLA. We know Tennessee is a vacancy that's out there as well. Where do you think Chip Kelly would want to go if he could choose?
I think UCLA is the perfect fit, and it's because UCLA is not a glamour job in the sense that you're in the shadows of the Lakers, of the Dodgers, of a couple of NFL teams, and I think Chip Kelly prefers that. I don't have an inside knowledge on that, but it's something I've read and heard from people that he likes not being in the spotlight like you would be in a place like Knoxville or Gainesville where you're the only game in town. Also, I was going through his recruiting numbers from when he was at Oregon. 2010, only 5 of 24 recruits from east of the Mississippi River. In 2011, 3 of 24.
Wow.
I mean, those are incredible numbers. So I'm not saying Chip Kelly couldn't go to Florida and recruit. He can, he's Chip Kelly. But his ties are California and Texas and Oregon and Washington. That's his neck of the woods. He's a West Coast guy.
So you actually think UCLA is the most intriguing vacancy? Because on the surface, a lot of people might go Florida, but perhaps there's also an easier route to getting into the playoffs on the West Coast.
Well, I think Florida's more intriguing because if they miss out on Chip Kelly, they miss out on Scott Frost. Dan Mullen says thanks but no thanks at Mississippi State. Who would have thought 10, 15 years ago 3 people could turn down the Florida Gators? It's unthinkable. So it really tells you where college football is. There's so much money in the sport that Mississippi State can pay $4.5–5 million a year for a head coach, and keep Dan Mullen away from a place like Florida that he has ties.
What's the least intriguing of these openings? Like, which is the one that you think is going to be the toughest for, and I'll put tough in quotation marks, toughest to fill?
Well, of the ones that are open right now, I think Tennessee, because you're playing second fiddle to Florida, unless they do get John Gruden, which I just think becomes more of a long shot every day.
Yeah, he's the Vegas favorite.
Exactly. But then it's like, who do you go? Mike Norvell at Memphis? Do you go back to the group of 5 schools, which they already did with Butch Jones, and it didn't work out? So do they have that big hire in them when you're competing against UCLA and Florida and maybe Texas A&M and Nebraska? I mean, there's so many big jobs that could become available. Tennessee kind of could get lost in the mix here.
Now, Oklahoma quarterback Baker Mayfield made some headlines this weekend with some trash talk, some crotch grabbing. Do you think that hurts his Heisman chances? And do you think it helps or hurts his evaluation going into the pros?
Well, for the Heisman, in an ideal world, the Heisman Trophy has a character element to it. And if 2 guys are equal, I think character should be the tiebreaker. But in a situation like this, where you have Jameis Winston, who 1 month after the state of Florida opened an investigation into rape allegations, he wins the Heisman Trophy. You can't tell me it's a character award anymore. If all else is equal, then yes, it's a character award. But Baker Mayfield has such a large lead on the field. I'm not supporting what he did, but I don't see enough there when the character issue is something that has been dealt with and thrown out the window in recent years.
What about the pros? I mean, because some guys could say, we don't want this kind of guy on our team, and then others might say, hey, there's some competitiveness here that we could channel.
Yeah, I think that's the balance. Where do you put a guy who's a former walk-on quarterback who wasn't offered many scholarships, who says, all right, I have that emotional competitive advantage that I use, and I have this big chip on my shoulder, but also saying, where's that line? Ultimately, I think that they're going to look at his on-field play and also look at what they meet with this guy one-on-one, say, what is he all about? But I don't think in the long run that catching him in the act of just a immature situation on the sidelines is going to be make or break for his NFL future.
I think a lot of coaches, if they're being honest, would say we'd rather if his flaws are out in the open than something that's behind the scenes. We have to go digging. Maybe he's got some bad relationships that we're not aware of. If he's going to do something right on the sidelines and that's potentially the worst thing that he'll do, I think a coach would take that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, in the offseason, he had the arrest for public intoxication. He's been in the spotlight now for 2-3 years. Everything about Baker Mayfield is out there. It's in the open. And with what we see every day in sports, I think a lot of this is somewhat small potatoes.
The last thing you want to get, though, is a Johnny Manziel type of reputation, yes. That's for sure. Okay, let's look at the Big Ten. Wisconsin easily taking care of Michigan over the weekend. They'll meet Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. Does the winner of that game, Pete, get into the college football playoff?
I would argue that if Wisconsin wins, I don't see how they're going to leave out an undefeated Big Ten team, even though that strength of schedule isn't very good. Ohio State is more interesting. They need some help. If Oklahoma loses to TCU in the Big 12 championship game, that opens up a spot for an Ohio State to come back into the picture, and that would be really big for the Buckeyes. That's the way I see Ohio State getting in. Wisconsin, I don't see how they would be left out, because then you'd have, if Oklahoma wins out, the Sooners, one ACC team, one SEC team, and then an undefeated Wisconsin at the 4th spot.
Speaking of the SEC, Iron Bowl coming up for the SEC West. If Auburn beats Alabama and wins out, where do you rank them? And can Alabama still get in with a loss?
I think that Auburn can make the playoff under that similar scenario where they get some help from TCU, who's most likely going to play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. That's the game that I think the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC are all keeping their eyes on, because I don't see a 2-loss TCU getting in. Their non-conference wasn't very good. Their best non-conference win was Arkansas, so they're not in the picture. That would then create the snowball effect where you could see maybe 2 SEC teams, maybe 2 ACC teams, or that Big Ten team like Ohio State. So that's the game that this all hinges on. As for Alabama, their strength of schedule has not been good enough to me to justify putting a 1-loss Alabama team without a conference championship into the college football playoff.
Okay, so let's talk about the rankings for this week. Kind of a blah weekend, really, for college football, except for that rivalry game USC-UCLA because of the quarterbacks. But do you see the committee changing their top 4 or 5 in any way?
Committee got a lot of flack last week for putting Miami and Clemson both above Oklahoma. I could see those flip-flopping. Miami struggled with Virginia early on. Oklahoma blew out Kansas, which they're supposed to do. So maybe there's some flip-flop in 2, 3, 4. Outside of that, it'll be the same 4 teams. Alabama will be at 1, and then it's just a question of the 2 ACC teams in Oklahoma. Where do they factor in? Obviously, Clemson had their massive win. Alabama took care of business. So it wasn't a great weekend, like you said. I don't see the 4 changing, maybe just the order.
So you don't think the fact that Wisconsin beat Michigan changes anything in the committee's eyes?
No, I mean, Michigan was 24. I would argue they should not even have been in the top 25. Their resume is not all that good. So it was a good win, but I don't think it's enough to overcome the fact that the rest of that was the first ranked team they had played all season. So I don't want to get carried away with one win over number 24, bumping them into the top 4 just yet.
Yeah, Pete Mundo, always appreciate your thoughts on a busy Monday. Thank you.
Anytime, guys.
We see you out there on Facebook Live, on Periscope, tweeting to us and sending us messages. Here are a few. Lena Tackett-Stiegel says, I think LaVar Ball needs to take a seat, many seats. His son would be in a Chinese prison if it were not for the president. Robin J says, need to grow up. Both need to grow up, but one is president and the other is a dad. Then Danny says, sports and politics don't mix, and that's why sports is failing. I don't know if I can agree with that. Anytime, it's not just the big political stuff like when Trump tweets about LaVar Ball or tweets about Marshawn Lynch. Really, anytime you decide to walk into a sports stadium, in some ways, it's political. Everything about sports is political.
Yeah, I don't know what sports is failing even means or what the empirical data behind that is. You know, just going through those quickly. We don't know what happened in China, first of all. Second of all, I totally agree with the dude who said one guy's the president, the other person is a dad. And third of all, even if we were to think sports and politics didn't mix, and I'm totally with you, they have always been intertwined, the leading person in the political environment is the person who made this a story. You know, it wasn't us. We didn't concoct this. We didn't, you know, hack into any Twitter accounts and post stuff. In the end, we'll see what happens, and maybe it will just blow away. It's probably a good opportunity to sell some big baller brand paraphernalia, though.
There's a literary term called an unreliable narrator. It's a narrator where you can't tell if they're being fully truthful with you as you're reading a book or something. Unreliable narrators. Okay, this one from Cody says, Saints will fall apart once the playoffs are here. I don't know if I see that. I feel like the Saints have a really good defense, and that's what really led them in their Super Bowl winning year. They had an opportunistic defense that was incredible, caused a lot of turnovers, and now you have a running game for Drew Brees. I don't think they're going to be stopped.
Talk about moving the goalposts, because if you'd mentioned the playoffs and the Saints before the season, people probably would have laughed at you.
That's true.
Now they're falling apart once they get there.
Well, Cody goes on to say, nice to see Minnesota win, but it's a one and done. I don't see him winning next year. Again, I don't understand why. Cody, why are you hating? They have a great defense. They're going to get Dalvin Cook back. They presumably will figure out their quarterback situation, whether it's Keenum. It's probably Bridgewater, though, next year once he's healthy. They have great weapons.
And I feel this way sometimes, too, where you sort of try to write off these teams who are above average, but then look at the league as a whole. I mean, Philadelphia looks like the dominant team, and that really came up out of nowhere because there aren't traditional dominant and juggernaut teams. There's basically the Patriots, who have a bye into the AFC Championship every year, and then now there is an opportunity for a lot of these teams to come up.
Teams are coming on, though. You know, I think that you're going to see Minnesota. I think they're picking up steam. Obviously, Pittsburgh coming off that big win Thursday night, if we remember back, that big win over Tennessee. I think they're picking up steam. The Rams, you know, that's a difficult loss. I was not expecting them to go into Minnesota and win, but I still think they are a good team. They travel well. Saints are on a huge roll. I mean, I think, and obviously the Eagles, I think we're in the mix, you know, that we're going to have an exciting finish here in the NFL.
Like to see some of these games, you know, between the good teams come down in tightly contested, high-profile situations. Cowboys ruined it in the second half last night.
They definitely did. Defending Dak Prescott, are we?
I'm still defending Dak Prescott. I mean, come on. Receivers has got to help the guy out a little bit.
Good point. And that's going to do it for us on this Monday show. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time with a whole new slew of topics. We hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stick with SI.com for all the latest news and headlines. And follow us on Twitter at SI Now Live. That's where we post clips from the show. See ya.